Welcome to the On the Wire podcast. I'm your host, Tim Keller. Along with me is Mr. Matt Disher. It's not nearly as exciting and joyful opening as it was last week, but last week was a very special day. So welcome back, everybody. If you're a first-time listener, Matt and Tim, that's us, are two Marine Corps veterans who served together, and now we like to get together once a week on a video chat and try to shoot the breeze a little bit, if you will.
And discuss classic music. Right here on Warm 95.
You're home for smooth jazz.
You ever listen to those people, though? You're like, wow, I'm going to fall asleep while I'm driving.
Yeah.
It's the Christmas music station, too.
Yeah, I'm going to drive right off this bridge by not even trying.
But do they go to school for having a really warm, soothing voice? For having a really warm, soothing voice.
It's I can make my voice sound like that, but it's interesting when you come across a human that just naturally has that, hi,
right.
I'm Bill. And you're like, can you hold me, Bill? Like,
right. Or the guys that have the sports announcer or DJ voices. And again, I can force myself to do that. Like, welcome back to Beyond the Wire podcast.
Yeah.
But I can't talk like that without smiling and laughing about it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, but they make a very good living off of doing those things. So if you have that talent, work on it. Get out.
I'll tell you, I took a class at University of Cincinnati many years ago, and it was Voices for All. That was who hosted it. They were called Voices for All, and it was a voiceover coach, and that was a pretty cool experience to go in there and learn how to do voiceovers and things like that. And I intended to pursue it, and I never did, frankly, because I don't know how. Even though that's what the class was about, I paid $100 to be there. And then I went in and I was like, I'm not really sure. Well, what do I do next? Make a demo tape? I'm not sure. But, I hear cartoon voices on Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon and stuff like that. I'm like, I could do that. Do you need better voices? I could do that.
Yeah. I will say, Matt, if you can do like accents and things, I want to say it's Amazon has ways for you to put your voice out there for authors to use your voice to do the audio side of their books.
Oh, yeah.
But, sometimes books like have multiple characters. So one character's Southern, another's, from the West Coast and is kind of hippie-ish, and you have to be able to switch your voice up, bang, bang, bang. And it's like,
yeah. See, I think that's something I could do. I'd be curious to know what the paycheck looks like. Cause again, I already feel like I'm busy with sports and kids and then my calendar all day long for work is just jammed. It's a good problem to have. I've got a lot going on. When do I find the time to do that kind of thing? And it has to be worth it. It really has to be worth it.
Yeah. Well, if you would have pursued it, you could have landed something like Shrek. And I'd say that's probably worth your time. I don't know what like Eddie Murphy and what is it? Mike Myers does Shrek.
Mike Myers. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know what they're pulling in, but I'm sure it's worth it.
I'd guess somewhere north of at least $5,000 per episode.
Yeah.
Could be somewhere between 5,000 and 10 million. I don't know exactly.
It's a hard life,
Right. But
somebody's got to animate it and you just talk.
Right. You'll find people who that's what they do for a living. They are voiceover artists. And the guy who does, if you ever watch Futurama, Philip J. Fry on Futurama, that guy he's been voices for so many other people that now when I hear it, I think his name is Billy West. When I hear Billy West's voice or one of his voices, I'm like, that's Philip J. Fry in Futurama. But he's got all these other voices that he does, and you'll hear him, and that's his entire career. I probably couldn't tell you what he looks like, but I could tell you what he sounds like.
Okay. I would say the guy that does Family Guy, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but I've seen videos of him.
MacFarlane.
There you go. I've seen videos of Seth where he'll go through the characters. He does like 5 or 6 of the voices on his own show.
Yep.
And he can go bang, bang, bang. Where for myself, if I got into a voice, my brain is so stuck on how do I make that happen? I couldn't just transition into the next, but it's a skill. It's definitely a skill. And they get paid very well for it.
So. My mom always told me I should do voices, cartoon voices and voiceovers. And perhaps I should just pursue it because I can do that kind of thing. I can switch my voices.
There you go.
But
mom knows
best.
Hustle.
It's going to be a side hustle. Right. Well, that, and she told me I should be a lawyer because I was really good at arguing.
I think that might have just been mom frustrated with a teenage boy at one point. Like,
Right.
you know what? You should just be a lawyer. All you ever do is argue with me.
Get out of my house and go to college and law school for 6 years. Get out of here.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. If you didn't listen or watch last week's episode, we had two of our good buddies on. It was a hell of a time. I had just a great time last week. It was a lot of fun. But the three of you guys spent a lot of time over in Okinawa scuba diving, and that's the first article I have pulled up this week. It's a article about the perils of potentially scuba diving. This individual was snorkeling,
right?
But a experienced scuba diver came to the rescue here. So a Marine was snorkeling outside of Camp Foster in Okinawa, Japan, when he got caught up in a rip current without actually realizing. He said he started off the about 50 yards off the shore, and before he even realized it, when he popped back up, he was about 200 yards off the shore. Began trying to work his way back to the shore. Now, if anybody's ever been caught in a rip current or anybody's ever heard of it, they suggest you swim parallel with the land, with the shore, till you get yourself out of the rip current, and then you can try to make your way back towards the shore. This individual said he was trying and just could not get it, began to panic and started to yell for help. That is when a 21-year-old Navy member from Florida heard the calls. He was actually out scuba diving with a Japanese native buddy of his, and the individual came to the rescue. It said it was a 45-minute test of endurance to get this other gentleman rescued from the rip current and back to shore. So I just want to give kudos to the scuba diver there that helped out the Marine. He is the aviation's electrician's mate, Ian Olney, from Florida. He grew up in Hawaii and in the Caribbean islands. So obviously, Florida, Hawaii, and the Caribbean. A lot of time in the water, I'm sure.
Yep.
Is a certified scuba instructor.
Scuba-fied
water instructor. I don't know what the hell happened there. But
thank God, words.
Yeah, but thank God that individual was there in that moment. It was right place, right time. And I'm sure that Marine owes him a huge gratitude. Debt of gratitude.
Jeez. Gratitude. It's Marine Corps birthday recovery week.
Wow.
So you have an excuse. Here's the hard attitude. The hard thing about what we do here is that we're reading articles while we're trying to talk about the articles, while we're trying to figure out what comes next. So like for the first 5 minutes of us being live, I'm on Facebook trying to post up our live streaming content to all these different pages while Tim is talking. And I'm trying to like hurry up and do it. And then I'll try to catch up with the article. And I'm like, all right, where are we? What are we talking about? And then try to join the conversation at an intelligent level. I'll tell you, if you go on military.com and type in snorkeling or scuba, you will see article after article of person who has died in the water, sailor, Marine, soldier, airman dying in the water off of Okinawa, or for that matter, anywhere else. So let's, have a conversation about this. It's exceptionally dangerous to be in the water at any rate if you're unprepared or you're not a strong swimmer. To your point, Tim, rip currents are one of those things that most people just a day at the beach, they've not experienced, but it's very easy for, especially if you're scuba diving or snorkeling and you don't realize how far you've been pulled out because your feet aren't touching the ground. You can't feel the water pulling you. So if you're just kind of out there looking at fish and all of a sudden you pop up and you're 500 meters out in the ocean and you're a snorkeler, it's going to be tough to get back in. But I think something that you just said from that article, he panicked. That person panicked, and that is where you lose your bearings in the water. That is something that I learned actually before the Marine Corps, before they threw us from the high dive with backpacks and rifles and boots and 60 or 80 pounds of gear on our backs, and we had to swim around the pool on our backs. Before they did all that, I knew that it was one of those lessons, probably from swim class or something like that, or swim team when I was a kid. If you panic in the water, that's when you start fighting and you get exhausted. You get exhausted very quickly too in the water. Human beings are decent swimmers. We're not made for the water though, unless you do it all the time. So thankfully there was a scuba diver around, but the universal signal for help if you're ever in the water is to put your hands over your head and wave them back and forth. If you ever find yourself in the water and you're suffering or struggling and you're exhausted or whatever. The other thing is, and I teach my 10-year-old son this, get on your back, lay on your back, arch your back so your chest is sticking up out of the water, and slowly bicycle kick your legs. And unless you're in really rough sea, you could essentially stay afloat for a long time without exhausting yourself until somebody comes to help you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the try not to panic is just good life advice.
Right.
As you begin to panic, it's never going to make a situation better.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter what the situation is. If you're in a hand-to-hand fight, panicking is just going to tire you out.
Right.
Drowning, panicking is just going to, your muscles are going to tense up. You're going to start to sink. You're going to become less buoyant.
Right.
You're at work and you're under a lot of stress. You start to panic. You're not going to solve the problem you were tasked with solving to begin with.
Right. Right.
So, just work on finding ways to keep yourself calm and not panic in these situations.
Yeah.
You'll find that you'll probably come out better for it.
Start thinking. In this case, a snorkeler probably has fins on, right? He's got a snorkel on. So put your face down in the water. Fins allow you to swim great distances without using a whole lot of work. Swim sideways, go a mile down the beach and then come back up. In Japan, it's a little bit different because there's coral reef around most of the island. Yeah. So you're not just able to walk back up on a beach. Sometimes you're walking back up on a like razor sharp rock, which is better than nothing.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about this last week when the other guys were on the podcast. We went out scuba diving during a storm, and the storm rolled in, and we had all the gear on. We had flotation devices. We inflated our vests. We had air tanks. We had masks, fins. We were still getting rocked against the rocks. It sucked. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm a pretty decent swimmer, but right now Mother Nature essentially has my fate in her hands. I was puny compared to the ocean.
Yeah. If you're out if you've ever been on the ocean when it gets bad, you have no control.
Right.
I licensed 50-ton captain, open oceans endorsement. I've been out in some pretty rough seas at times, and it makes you feel very powerless when the ocean really starts to go, because you're just hoping. We're gonna try to steer into these as best we can, and hope she doesn't decide we're tossing over. So.
Yep. There were times that I was on the USS Harper's Ferry in that first deployment that I had, and we were doing an underway replenishment or unrep, where the supply ship would pull up alongside of us and we'd refuel and things like that. Or we'd have the USS Boxer next to us, and we'd be in such rough seas that essentially if you're standing out on the flight deck and you're looking at the boat next to you, you're looking down.
And then you're looking up.
10 stories down onto their deck, you're looking down. Yeah. And then all of a sudden you're looking up, and this is 10 stories above you, and you're looking at the bottom of the ship that's floating in the water. And that's how big. You can see it on film. You can watch YouTube videos about ships in the ocean and rough seas. You never quite get the feeling until you're on a ship that's being effectively tossed in the air. There were times where I'm laying in my rack in the Harper's Ferry. I could feel it leave the water. And this is a ship the size of a shopping mall. I mean, it's huge. And I'd feel it. You'd come up, you'd lose gravity for a second, and then you'd slam back down and the boat would shake, And I'm like, this is a boat the size of a large skyscraper, and we're getting tossed around at this, It's not fun.
Yeah, it is definitely scary. I think I actually closed that article down, but I think the article said there have been 5 service members that have passed away since the beginning of 2020, just in Okinawa alone, due to water-related deaths. So
sounds right.
Hey, just a tip, and knowing the age of these individuals that make up the United States military, it's never a good idea to be intoxicated,
right,
or under the influence when you're trying to do any of these things. So
and frankly, one of the rules of scuba diving, and maybe the same thing applies for snorkeling, and in Okinawa, don't go out in the ocean by yourself. You always want to have a team or a pair. And so in case something happens, now somebody might logic that, well, what if both of you get pulled out? That's fine. Then you can kind of work together to get back in. But you don't ever go out into a potentially dangerous situation. And who knows? You may not have thought it was dangerous. But understanding rip currents, that's another thing. There's probably flags on the beach somewhere, or some sort of weather warning that's saying that rip currents are high. I know that they at least do that here in the coastal cities of the United States. On the beaches, there's flags. And so you want to be cautious of rip currents. I was on vacation a few months ago, and a small child got pulled out in the ocean and disappeared, and they found his body a couple of miles down the beach. But parents took their eyes off of him for 1 minute, and he was gone. And suddenly all of Panama City Beach, Florida, became a search party. We all went out to the beach and we're walking around looking for this kid. But that's how fast and dangerous it is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely got to be scary. Let's move on to the next article now. Matt, you sent this one to me, and I thought it was interesting. You're a Cincinnati guy. I know you have been a Bengals fan in the past. They're having a pretty decent season this year. If you don't know about the Cincinnati Bengals, though, they play in Paul Brown Stadium. I believe the owner is from one of Paul Brown's children.
Mike
I
Brown.
believe.
Yeah.
Mike Brown.
Yeah. Mike Brown is not as beloved as Paul Brown.
Yes. Yes. And the article we're talking about is not about Mike Brown. It is about Paul Brown. Paul Brown, if you don't know about Paul, grew up in Ohio. He started coaching high school football, worked his way up through the ranks, took over the Ohio State Buckeyes college football team, was very successful there. But then after Pearl Harbor, he was enlisted in the Navy, went to the Chicago training facility, and the Navy, being as smart as they are, decided, hey, we have this really good football coach on our hands. Why don't we try to build some camaraderie and some teamwork and things like that through the use of sports? So he started coaching football for the Navy. They found success there. But then as the war winded down and he was getting out of the Navy, he was invited to take over a head coaching position for a team that was starting up in Cleveland. And a lot of the players and coaches had worked with Paul Brown in the past. Everybody wanted him to name the team after himself. He said, that's a ridiculous idea. There was a contest to name the team, so we could be looking at the Cleveland Panthers. But instead, the owner said, no, I don't like the Panthers. We're naming them after you. They're going to be the Cleveland Browns. So that's how we have the Cleveland Browns in Cleveland, Ohio. They're actually named after Paul Brown. I'm a pretty big football fan. It's the only team that I know that is named after an individual. And what's even weirder is in the same state, there's a team that is owned by a relative of this individual. So it's a very interesting thing. But Paul Brown had great success there in Cleveland early on in his professional coaching career. He retired, took a 5-year hiatus, and then came back to coach with the Cincinnati Bengals, coached them until the 60s or early 70s. I can't remember. But then he retired for good. I know he passed away back in the 90s. I want to say of pneumonia or the flu or something got him.
Yeah.
But Paul Brown had a
pneumonia, 1991, 82 years old.
There you go.
Yep.
He was a hell of a football coach, a hell of a football player. And the man is revered in NFL circles. But I honestly, until reading this article, had no idea that Paul Brown was ever a part of the Navy.
I didn't know that either. That's what excited me about it so much. But then if you look at this, Ohio State, the Buckeyes, it's one of the greatest teams in college football. And then, and of course, that's debatable. My wife would come and argue with me. And
Hurricanes,
Nebraska, they're not doing too well over the last few years, but she's not the biggest OSU fan, so she gets pretty upset. Anyway, this guy, look at this thing. I mean, he came from the military, or rather, he was on board with the Ohio State Buckeyes, went to the military, then was essentially the founder or coach of the Cleveland Browns, and then the same thing for the Bengals, and was one of the largest investors in the Bengals franchise as they were coming about. So, it's all Ohio. It's the 3 big football organizations inside of Ohio.
Absolutely,
it's pretty outstanding.
Obviously, to have your hands this imprinted on America's largest money-making sport is just something to be revered in itself. But the things he did, the way he scouted, the way he introduced watching game film on your opponents, seeing what they did the game before, the week before, and then being able to plan accordingly for your next matchup. It's things that every team does today. Every team absolutely does it. There's not a team out there that would think there's no need to scout. So this guy was an innovator, has handprints all over the game of football, which I love and so many other people do. But yeah, to find out he was also a veteran was a big thing for me. I was very interested by this article. For sure.
Super cool.
Yeah. Let's move over here to Iwo Jima, another island in Japan. Plenty of stories out there, plenty of movies, plenty of literature on the battles of Iwo Jima. But Iwo Jima is a small island. I want to say it's like 750 some miles south of Tokyo. But back in World War II, as the Navy took over, or as the Japanese took over the island, they sunk a bunch of ships in the harbor off the coast of Iwo Jima in an attempt to block our naval fleet from reaching the shores and having access to that harbor, making it easier on us to hit land there, essentially to start our attacks. But recently, some underwater volcanic activity has started to raise the ground level up. I know another island's popped up there. I think they said they have 3 islands since the 1900 have popped up right there around Iwo Jima. The first 2 have washed off since then. So we'll see if the third one lasts. But because of this underwater volcanic activity, we're starting to see these sunken ships rise to the top of the ocean. On the article there is an aerial photo, I'm assuming taken by a drone of some sort. But yeah, you see 4 or 5 vessels that are now sticking and protruding up out of the water off the coast of Iwo Jima. Again, something I knew nothing about, the Battle of Iwo Jima, and good strategy on the Japanese part. They're sinking, ships, creating obstacles. A big thing when we're talking about battle plans in the Marine Corps is, making bottlenecks and pinch points.
Yep.
Same thing. They didn't want them to have access to this harbor. It's the safest and easiest place to offload equipment, supplies, personnel. So we'll not allow you access to this, and we'll just, really bunker down everywhere else on the island to make your life an absolute living hell trying to get any sort of access to this island.
Right.
But another great article, something that I knew nothing about going into today's show.
Yep. So Iwo Jima was one of those places. First of all, the background of our broadcast right now is from the iconic flag raising on the top of Mount Suribachi at Iwo Jima, which I'm going to share another photo. It's just the actual black and white photo there. So this is an iconic photo. This is in Arlington. There's a massive statue of these guys raising this flag. And then, of course, it's iconic to the Marine Corps because it was one of those moments where this was a hard-fought battle. But interestingly, not only did they sink these boats and make it harder for the Allied forces to land there, then unlike we're all familiar with the D-Day invasion of France in Europe, excuse me, when the Allied forces were landing in Normandy, there were bunkers, defense systems set up there on the beach, right? And so there were Germans just mowing down American troops. A little bit different in Iwo Jima. They landed there, and effectively a lot of the fighting took place once they got on land. It was kind of like draw them in and then channelize them and fight them there. So kind of an interesting, it was interesting to see at Iwo Jima all of the defenses set up. This was one of the most important stands that the Japanese Navy had to make in holding the Americans at bay and holding the Marines and the Navy at bay. But basically they bunkered into Mount Suribachi and tunneled into it, and then had all these like large guns shooting at our ships and shooting at our troops that landed on the beach. They effectively like let them land and then start shooting them. So it was a multi-tiered strategy, a losing strategy, no less. We beat them with resources and manpower in the end. But it was kind of interesting. It's kind of interesting to learn all the history and what happened there. And now some of that history is becoming uncovered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I know, Matt, you said your son and you went to Arlington. You want to plan another trip there for him. Have you ever taken him to the Marine Corps Museum down there at Quantico?
I haven't. So we were going to go there while we were in town. And unfortunately, they were still doing the whole COVID lockdown. This was last spring. Coming from Ohio, business as usual in Ohio, where things have been normal here for a long time. DC was a little bit different. All the museums were shut down. The Smithsonian, everything was closed. The White House had a fence around it, around the greater perimeter. You couldn't even get close to the White House. The Capitol building had a fence around it. This was following the election and all of the events around the election. So, it's interesting. The Capitol was locked down for obvious reasons. But then when I went over to the White House and took my son in front of there, wanted to get as close as we could out in Lafayette Square. There's a building that burned down from the riots that were happening in the summer prior to the election.
Wow.
So it's just like utter chaos. Couldn't get into anything. He still enjoyed it. It was a couple of days in DC. He still enjoyed what we could see.
Well, if you get him back down there and you get him to that Marine Corps Museum, they actually have some containers of the sand, of that black sand from Iwo Jima. Yeah, and you can touch it and feel it. And
I have been to that museum, but I feel like it was still under construction. There were still parts of it that were being constructed. It was fairly new when I went there, as I recall. And it was, again, super cool experience.
Yeah.
But it's better. You're right. If I could bring my son, it'd be better to share it with somebody instead of just walking around by myself.
Yeah, I obviously was not in around the same time as Iwo Jima. I don't know if I've ever personally spoke with anybody that has been in that battle, but knowing everything it took to win that island, being able to touch some of that sand, I don't want to say it was like a religious. It was an awe-inspiring moment.
Right. Well, this goes back to, if you look at, the Marines drinking from the fountain at Bella Wood.
Yeah.
These are iconic moments for the Marine Corps, not only for the Marine Corps, but the whole of the U.S. military. And so places like Iwo Jima, places like Bella Wood, just the different battle. I mean, I can't name them all, but there are a handful of things we learn in boot camp. And then from a historical standpoint, these were iconic turning points in major conflicts where, for us, Bella Wood and Iwo Jima in Midway and things like that, like the Navy had the battle at Midway, right? The Army claims D-Day, the D-Day invasion in Normandy. Those are iconic, turning points of major conflicts. And so, you're right. For Marines, Iwo Jima, the sands of Iwo Jima, there are movies made about it. There's one of the most iconic pictures there in our background of the Marines and the corpsmen raising the flag on top of Mount Suribachi. These are, you're right. It's like not a religious experience, but it's darn near like meeting, it's like seeing the things you've always wanted to see, or being part of something that it's this legacy of history, legacy of people who had to fight and win this battle.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Before we get into the next article, I wanted to say, everybody out there, currently we have 965 followers on our Facebook page. That, absolutely awesome. We want to get that to over 1,000. We're 35 away. Tell a friend, tell a relative, tell them to give us a like, give us a follow there on Facebook. Let's get us over 1,000 before we have next week's episode. Also wanted to take a moment. One of our very first guests, I think he was on one of the episodes where we didn't broadcast live, and it was just a recorded episode, and it's up on YouTube, but it was never put out there live. CJ Lang has spent over 20 years with the U.S. Air Force, and at one point was part of the Air Force One crew that kept that plane moving under the Obama administration. Today, he announced that he is, pushed that button to start the task of working towards retirement. So, CJ, I know you're listening. Just wanted to say congratulations, sir. I know that 20 plus years of anything's a long time, but 20 plus years in the armed forces is an amazing accomplishment. Thank you very much for your service, and I look forward to seeing where you go from here, man.
He just looking at our previous episodes, he was essentially number 3. He was the third episode, but our first guest. He was the first guest because the first 2 episodes was just you and I.
All right.
So he was our first guest. If anybody wants to go into our channel on YouTube, he is the third video we posted 1 year ago. Life in the Air Force and Preparing for What's Next is the title of that vehicle.
Yeah, because at the time he knew that it was coming soon. I'll have to reach out to him and see if he'd like to come back on at some point as he gets close to that mark, see what he has planned. So, great guy, and I'm very, very happy for him. Look forward to seeing what he does next. Matt, another article you decided to pull up for us this week. A new poll shows Americans believe corporations should help veterans find work. Now, we know that there's plenty of organizations and nonprofits out there that help link veterans with companies. This poll is saying that the companies themselves need to do a better job. And what's funny is, as I'm looking at this article here on my screen, I have a Cushman & Wakefield ad right here. Find your future with Cushman & Wakefield. We are the DoD skill bridge provider.
We do advertising with military.com.
There you go. A company called Just Capital, they are an independent nonprofit organization, did this survey, and an overwhelming majority of Americans believe that U.S. companies should be recruiting military veterans. That's one of the key findings from the survey. They asked just over 3,000 Americans. It was an overwhelming majority believe that companies could be doing more to recruit veterans. And also in this article, it mentions that veteran unemployment is not necessarily the biggest problem. It's underemployment. Yeah, they believe that many military veterans are coming out and kind of settling into their first couple jobs and making less than what their skills are honestly worth. So they're saying, I would imagine that this survey is saying that these companies with these better paying jobs need to go out there and put this legwork in and find these veterans that have these skills that these companies are looking for and try to find ways to put them in these seats.
Right. Yeah, I tell you, a lot of companies are doing a lot of this work already. And again, some of those companies, or most of those companies, are probably the best functioning companies in the world. They understand the value that a prior service member brings to their business. This is another thing. I've always been against saying that anybody owes us anything. I'm opposed to taking advantage of the Veterans Day discounts. I will use the Lowe's 10% discount only because they keep encouraging me to do it, and they've asked me to do it. And then I know some of the guys that work in that program. But this is the thing. And actually we've had one of them on here. Mike Piper, we had him on here previously. He leads military programs at Lowe's. I've always been adamantly against saying anybody owes us anything. I don't think that's true. We all volunteered for military service, aside from people in the previous generations that have been drafted, but the current generation has volunteered. We knew that we'd put ourselves in harm's way. We knew that what we were getting into for the most part. And I'm adamantly against trying to force businesses or force anybody to do anything. Because and the reason I say that is there's a number of reasons. And mind you, I'm in this space. I do this for a living. The reason I don't think it should be forced or it should be required is because you'll have less passionate results when things are required of people. When you force people to do things, when you force a company to hire military, for example, the reasons are going to be for the wrong reasons. Here's what's happening right now. And the reason why historically, maybe beyond COVID, it's a little bit higher, but historically for the last handful of years, veteran unemployment's been at record lows because companies have realized that this is some of the best talent on earth. And not everybody that comes out of the military is an amazing superstar or an amazing rock star. I mean, it's a cross section of society, but what almost everybody does, have coming out of the military is perhaps a diversified look on how to execute operations, and they have adherence to policy, and they understand safety, and they understand all these things that businesses want, that businesses are trying to hire. So I think we have a handful of opportunities to improve this. If this poll is saying that companies need to do more, I talk about the Skill Bridge program quite a bit. It's a game-changing program. It's a game-changing opportunity for allowing people to leave the military and effectively get plugged into their next step in their career. One of the challenges that we have ahead of us within the Skill Bridge program is that within individual commands, they're not promoting these programs. They're not always supportive of their service members taking these programs. So we have this miss here, right? And I've always said this. The miss is that if the military would do a better job of transitioning people out and giving them the opportunities to come work at companies like mine and the other organizations that are out here offering them internships and Skill Bridge internships and apprenticeship programs, if the military and the commanding officers and elements would do a better job of encouraging those programs instead of trying to hang on to their people would leave the military and they'd all go get decent jobs, or most of them would go get decent jobs. Of course, individual user experience may vary, but you have a lot of well-honed, skilled, educated people in the military. And if you plug them into opportunities that allow them to go pursue post-military careerism, put away your recruiting budget, Marine Corps, Army, Navy, Air Force, Space Force, put away your recruiting budget, because just like an Ivy League college or any of the in-demand colleges, if the rule is that people leave your school and get a great paying job, or that they play in one of your sports programs and it's the best sports program in the world and they go on to the NFL or the MLB or the NBA. If the military would do the same thing, you'd never have to recruit. You'd never have to spend billions of dollars on recruiting budget. People would just want to join. And that's where the disconnect is. There's constant conversations out here about how we do a better job of engaging our post-military service members for employment so that the unemployment numbers go down. But I think in some cases, the military doesn't look at it that way. The military is looking at it like, we're here to be the military. We're not here to transition people out. So there's a disconnect between them and the unions and the corporations, et cetera. I'll finish that thought with this. One of the things about having or running a military program inside of your company, there are tax incentives for hiring veterans. There's tax incentives for hiring unemployed veterans. And then programs like the SkillBridge program equal real dollars that you are either not spending in training people or that you are going to recoup in lack of turnover. So right now we're experiencing turnover tsunami across the board in the United States. Well, what happens when you take a person out of the military like me, like us, right, Tim, combat engineers, blowing things up and shooting guns, and you put me into an operations management role and you train me up for 4 or 5 months during my SkillBridge internship, I'm going to be institutionally loyal to you. I'm going to stick around as long as it makes humanly sense, until you say, hey, I can't have a promotion, or you're working me on weekends and holidays, then I'm going to bail out. But ultimately, that's going to make me institutionally loyal, and it's going to save you. What I think the rule for turnover is that you're paying a year and a half salary, or salary and a half, to fill the turnover of somebody who is a revenue producer inside of a business.
Yeah.
Avoid it all, and just find institutionally loyal people and train them and keep them. So there's a lot of financial benefits to all of this.
Yeah, Matt, I think you made a fantastic point there about, you see it with big college sports programs. When they have a player, we'll stick to football since football's kind of been a theme today. But if Ohio State, for instance, has a quarterback that's just really, really doing well, having a great season, the local fans, the schools themselves will get on social media. We'll call into radio shows and start talking this player up, trying to get them postseason awards, get them a Heisman,
right?
Potentially, because it's one more thing the schools can go to these prospects coming out of high school, still trying to choose colleges, and say, look, man, we have X number of Heisman winners. We have X number of our 22 starters leaving to go to the NFL this next season. You could do the same thing with the military.
Right.
Let's say the Army started a program where they got out in front of all the other branches, and 3 of 5 Army veterans within their first 6 months of leaving, being in uniform, are in a job where they're not in this underemployment category.
Right.
They are, they're making, $65,000 to $80,000 to start on their first job, leaving the military, with all the time in the world ahead of them to grow on that base.
Yep.
And they can then go to these kids that are standing in the middle, standing in that hallway in the recruiting station, looking at these 4 different doors. Which one do I want to go knock on? And, they'll, come out in the hallway and say, come on over here, kid, come talk to, talk to the Air Force, come talk to the Marine Corps. Everybody says, hey, 75% of our individuals leave the Army afterwards with the ability to get an $80,000 a year job to start.
Yep. Right.
And right there, you're going to be, yeah, I'm going to spend my 4 years in the Army, and I'll get out, and I'll be way ahead of my peers.
Yeah. And that's especially appealing for people who might not have the financial resources. They're like, well, you're telling me, and I always say this to groups when I'm speaking to them, the military is a great equalizer. It doesn't matter what neighborhood you came from, what color your skin is, what language you speak. I know people who went in the military, and it's anecdotal when I say I know people, but from a statistical standpoint, I know of people. I have stats that prove this. People who came from the worst of living situations, or the worst of family situations, or the worst socioeconomic situations, did the military 5 years, 10 years, 25 years, whatever, came out and are now earning a pay rate much larger than any of their neighborhood peers from back on the block, as we used to say, and it happens day in and day out. I mean, we just talked about We talked about Mike Brown being, or I'm sorry, not Mike Brown, Paul Brown being, having military background and things like that. There are lists upon lists of business leaders and celebrities and athletes who have also served in the military too. And the military has certain disciplines. There are CEOs across the board who have served in the military, and I would venture to say that some of these people are, they are minorities. Some of these people are disabled. Some people may have come from different socioeconomic backgrounds, but they came out and they were able to plug into different opportunities. So the thing is that companies are going to hire the best talent no matter what. It's these unique programs like Skill Bridge and other company offerings where they're willing to bring somebody in who has, who's a machine gunner in the infantry. And that person is like, hey, I'm a machine gunner in the infantry. What can I do inside of your business? If you're a company that says, hey, we're willing to train you up and give you an opportunity, that's huge. The underemployment piece, just for fair value, that was me. When I left the Marine Corps, I worked in a convenience store for about a year and a half. Part of it was while I was going to college. But I worked in a convenience store making $8 an hour. My paychecks were much smaller than what I was earning in the military. Plus, I had to pay for healthcare and stuff like that, and benefits. That's underemployment. I think Australia even has a similar number where they're saying that most of the people that leave the military within 1 year are making 30% less than what they were making in the military. I would venture to say that our numbers are probably somewhere around there in the United States as well. Most people that leave the military are probably making 30% less or making 30% undervalue what their skill set or their trade is.
Wow. Yeah. I know this article said that 34% of American veterans are in that underemployed category. Yep. So 34% of American veterans are considered making wages less than what their skill set is actually worth.
And it's probably a comparison to take somebody with 10 years of the same experience in the civilian market. They're being paid $100,000 a year, but 10 years in the military, they're being paid 80. That's how we define underemployment. There's probably a stat in there somewhere too, and this plays into a lot of how people are being paid, how some groups are being paid more than others, et cetera, that might say some of our veterans are coming home and, like me, going to college, and thusly their income is a lot smaller because of their situation. So there's probably some numbers that play into there. But I know, again, anecdotally and historically, veterans leave the military. People leave the military after their active duty, and they struggle to plug into something that is matching their leadership or skill level, their ability to earn. And that's why you have veterans that plug in. There's a statistic that says veterans plug into their first job out of the military and generally stay there for 6 months. It's because they plug into something to feed their family or put food on the table. But then once they realize, like, hey, I know a little bit more than probably what I'm being paid to do, if that company's not going to promote them or pay them more, they're going to bail and go somewhere else. That's and by the way, that's the rule for everybody. That's not military. It's not exclusive to the military. That's everybody would probably do that.
Yeah. I mean, you also have that individual that just graduated high school. I don't think college is going to be the right fit for me. I'm going to go ahead and get this job. Unless they land that really special gig, right off the bat, they're probably not sticking around too long. They're going to get tired of it and think, you know what, I'm better than this, or maybe college is the right fit or whatever. And they're probably going to bounce pretty quick themselves. But definitely something we need to keep working on. And I think the survey's off on the right track. I think that there's definitely more that the companies could do to take a better look at veterans coming in. The last article I have pulled up, and it has nothing to do with the military, but I want to say it was the 7th of November, so about 10 days ago, a SpaceX capsule with the crew Dragon Endeavour was coming back from the International Space Station. They had been up there since April of this year. 4 crew members went up. They spent, about 6 months up there, and they were coming back. But something happened on their travel to the space station that the toilet on the capsule was now out of use. So these individuals were going to have to wear diapers for the almost 20-hour trek back to Earth. I find that to just be mildly amusing, but you have 4 of, probably some of the brightest minds on this planet, and they're all going to be sitting there wearing adult diapers, traveling through space. if there was extraterrestrial life out there, they're watching these individuals like they haven't even figured out how to deal with their waste. They're sitting in it themselves.
I guess you got to do what you got to do. I've been watching this series on, I think it's Apple TV, called For All Mankind, and it's sort of this historically inaccurate take on how space travel has unfolded and how the space race with the Soviets unfolded.
Okay.
But if you haven't checked it out, it is called For All Mankind. It stars the guy who played RoboCop in the RoboCop remake, and I cannot think of his name right off the top of my head.
I'm not great with that.
As soon as we hang up here, I'm gonna
remember it. Dang it!
I'm gonna remember it. But anyway, it feels somewhat historically accurate. Like scientifically, it's accurate. Joel Kinnaman is his name. I had to look it up. Joel Kinnaman played RoboCop in the remake a few years back. But they go into space and there's all these obstacles. Like, what happens if the Russians would have landed on the moon first? Or what happens if the Russians and the Americans were on the moon battling over resources like ice and water on the moon? It's a well-made, I mean, it feels like a Spielberg type of organized, well-produced video. At any rate, it shows some of the rigors they have to go through as astronauts. So that part is probably historically accurate, how the selection processes happen and the emotional and mental toughness portion of being up in space. But I would venture to say, I mean, they have diapers on board, right? So it's probably a redundancy, like everything else in space flight and air travel. There's triple and quadruple redundancies. You have to account for what happens if the toilet breaks. What happens if we run out of diapers? I bet you there's another contingency. Well, what do we do if we run out of diapers? Then what do we do? So
you're just in your suit.
Right. But a lot of these people are former pilots. They're, former military. They have to go through the rigors of this. So peeing into a diaper is probably the least of the physical or emotional or mental tolls that this trip might have to take. And it probably makes for great stories later on in the podcast when they join us one day.
Yeah. But I would say that, this was probably a dream for these individuals for probably a good portion of their lives. Like, I want to go to space someday.
Right.
And growing up on our age, you saw the space shuttles land and the astronauts would slide down the little slides onto the tarmac and they'd be greeted by the firefighters and they'd be walking on and these people are like, that's going to be me someday. And instead they're, defecating in a diaper.
Right. Well, but I'll say this, think about this. That's a news story now. We probably wouldn't have known about them unless they were using diapers, right?
Yeah,
that put them on the map. So for all intents and purposes, it seems embarrassing from go.
Yeah.
But in reality, it probably just offered them a little bit more media. It's like every time Elon Musk, whenever he comes on the podcast, it's like whenever Elon Musk says anything, most CEOs are probably like, oh, I would never say that. Elon Musk is largely famous because of the things that he says and the things that he does. It's not because he's sitting in the shadows. So along the lines here, now we know who these astronauts are. Now we know of this space mission that we probably otherwise wouldn't even be talking about had it not been for the toilet breaking.
Yeah. The crew was up in space for those 6 months. They installed some new solar panels to help upgrade the station's power grid. They also grew the first green chili peppers in space, and then they used them to make tacos. Space tacos, if you will.
Space tacos.
So, hey.
One day we'll be intercepted by some extraterrestrials and they will be like, we'll be like, oh, we made space tacos, and they're going to be like, we've been floating around in space for 1,000 years. They're out there. What
we've been looking for. Yeah.
The truth that we've been looking for a taco stand, and then suddenly NASA is paying its bills by making tacos.
Yeah, they're hawking tacos to extraterrestrials.
Let me ask you a question, Tim. How much would you pay to eat a taco that was made in space? Like if they made them up there and then wrapped them up in foil and brought them back down and you were waiting on the tarmac for when they landed, how much would you pay? If you were Elon Musk, how much would you pay?
I am a huge fan of Mexican food in general. Anytime the wife says, hey, what do you eat tonight? My answer is always tacos. Even if we literally just had tacos the night before. It's just my dumb little thing I do.
Yeah.
But also, growing up when we did, the big thing was like, ooh, Tang, it's what the astronauts drink, and dehydrated food, it's what the astronauts eat. And if you've tried any of these things, you're like, this isn't that great.
Yeah.
And so I would like to think that space food's come a long way since then,
It's
but
like
I can't.
MREs probably,
But
right?
I can't imagine it's great. So what would I don't know. $5. It's a taco at the end of the day. I'm $5 for a space taco.
See, if I was so wealthy that like I just had money to burn, I'd want to be the guy on the tarmac. Like I'll pay $5,000.
I'll give you $5,000 right now for that taco.
Right. I'll give you $5,000. Right. And then I'll do merchandising and I'll put it on t-shirts and things like that.
There you go. Yeah.
Space tacos.
I don't know if space tacos are that great, honestly.
Yeah.
I don't know. Matt, you brought up For All Mankind. I wanted to bring up a show myself. I've taken a little bit of a hiatus from it. It is, again, futuristic space type show. It's called Raised by Wolves. I want to say it's on HBO Max.
Mm-hmm.
The religions kind of split. The atheists and the religious people start battling, essentially just going to destroy the world. But they've created androids, and they shoot some androids and some embryos off to space, with the mission being these androids are supposed to raise these embryos up and create a new and perfect world.
Yeah.
Well, some other individuals get off the planet and happen to find these people, and all hell breaks loose. Very weird, though. It's very
interesting.
Weird.
I feel like I started looking at this show, and I'm looking at it now online.
Yeah.
I feel like I started looking at this, and then I just sort of lost track of. You know, when you see like a preview for a show, and you're like, I have to watch that.
Yeah, and then
you just never get back to it.
Another 30 previews cross your screen at some point, and you're like, oh, that one I saw 3 days ago is now way off in the ether.
Right.
Yeah, this one, sci-fi, futuristic, definitely weird. It keeps you guessing. Keeps you guessing what's going to happen next, though. So if you're out there and interested in a possible show to watch, I'd say Raised by Wolves on HBO Max is a recommendation for me.
The executive director or producer, rather, is Ridley Scott, who, as you know, made the Aliens movies. So
that's when I had a very similar thing happen to me. I saw the preview for it on like another show I started on HBO Max, and it said, it gives you a little preview before your show that you've requested starts up, and I go, ooh, that does look good, and that's it by Ridley Scott. And I go, oh, and same deal. I was like, I need to check that out. And 3 or 4 days go by, and I'm like, man, what was that show called? I had to go look it out. Look it up.
That's how the M. Night Shyamalan movies come about. When it's like directed by M. Night Shyamalan, I'm like, I have to watch it, even though I'm going to be disappointed with the plot twist. Eventually, like The Town or something, it was like it just turned out that like it was adults dressing up like creatures in the woods, and I was like, oh. But like Signs was really good. It was creepy. It kept you on your toes the whole time. And then suddenly there are aliens in the cornfield, and it's been that way the whole time, but you couldn't see any of it until the last 10 minutes of the movie.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah. I would say, what was it? His last ones, the Unbreakable and stuff like that. That young man that played that kid with all those different personalities, he did a hell of a job.
Yep.
I don't know what his name is, but
Split.
There you go.
It's James McAvoy.
When he has that one scene where he like transitions between like 4 or 5 of his characters in a row.
Yeah.
We talked about it earlier, like being able to change voices. He literally, you see him like change. His face changes, his manners. Like, and I'm like, that is great acting right there. That was amazing.
Yeah. But the storyline of it is just so creepy. All his movies are creepy.
Yep.
They just kind of wig you out.
Yeah, absolutely.
I found one last story here on military.com, and it is 5 topics of conversation veterans should avoid at the office, and we can probably have some fun with this for the last couple of minutes here.
Okay.
Number 1, combat war stories.
Okay. What if you're asked?
If you're asked, I think it's like a lunchtime conversation by yourself, but you probably shouldn't be going into
gather around, everyone.
Right. Like you have a disagreement with one of your coworkers. You're like, listen, Bob, I didn't kill 17. I wasn't taking a shelling for 3 days just so you could sit here and take the last coffee out of the coffee machine without making new coffee. So that's interesting. It says, without realizing it, your new civilian colleagues encourage you to share war stories and can be intrigued or even fascinated with your experiences during deployment, particularly in combat situations. You might feel tempted to ingratiate yourself to your new coworkers by telling them detailed stories of attacks and conflicts you personally participated in. I think what it's saying is that they're going to mischaracterize you, and then you suddenly become sort of a token in the office, and nobody's looking at you as one of your counterparts or as one of their counterparts. They are not perceiving you differently. Oddly enough, I coach a third grade basketball team, and when they found out that I was in the Marines, first of all, they didn't know what the Marines were, but they knew it's a branch of the military. And then the question from all of them becomes, did you kill anybody? And that's what it is 100% of the time. Anytime they see me wearing a shirt or whatever, and I don't even bring it up anymore, but they want to know, did you kill anybody? Number 2, use of profanity.
Yeah.
Goes without saying.
I would say that there's that term, cussing like a sailor. There's that term lives for a reason. And I would say that term lives through most of the branches. And when you find yourself outside of the military and in a professional setting, you need to remind yourself this sort of language is not acceptable.
Right. This is commonplace in the military. In fact, one of the things I heard was that a good NCO can cuss for 5 minutes without repeating a single cuss word. And so it was always encouraged. It was, although in boot camp, the drill instructors would always say friggin', and because they would encourage them not to curse, even though it's the Marine Corps and it's every other word is some other bad word and it's exceptionally violent and aggressive, but friggin' was almost a bad word. So in this, it says often foul language is perceived as hostile and offensive and can challenge the company's commitment to a positive culture. Civilian employers pride themselves on offering inclusive, receptive, and safe places for work. I just imagine, me as a young NCO coming out of the military and coming into the current environment where I am, where every other word out of my mouth was a bad word back then, and I wouldn't be able to. I wouldn't be able to contain myself. Number 3 is anything ist. So racist, sexist, etc. Again, companies are looking for a more diverse and inclusive and equitable culture. In the military, things tend to be, although this is probably changing a little bit, but things historically tended to be very blunt and honest, and people would just kind of say, you got people from all over the world among you, and people would just kind of say what's on their mind. And I know sometimes some of that stuff could be, I think we've lost track sometimes in media and social media of the definition of anything ist. Sometimes we take it a little bit too far, saying that saying certain statistical things are now considered racist, sexist, etc. But in the military, that stuff it's truth, and we say things like, "Hey, you came from here because it was a bad neighborhood," and somebody in the military, they're like, "Well, that's true." Out here, that might be looked at, maybe frowned upon in corporate settings. So it says commenting on somebody's appearance or clothing, particularly somebody of the opposite sex. So now that is, we started learning, we talked about this on our last podcast. We received in the early 2000s one of the first sexual harassment classes that I had ever heard of. And although it was very loose and kind of willy-nilly, it was not, it was no less, basically, it was them telling us like, hey, you can't walk up to the girls and say certain things that you've been saying, and it was applied to all of us. I didn't generally do that kind of stuff anyway, but it was always kind of like, I'm like, wow, this really changes everything. Now, what are half of these guys going to talk about, right? And then referring to someone's ethnicity or heritage, particularly as it relates to their ability to do their job. Obviously, that's a huge no-no. I've always talked about that in the military. At any rate, I don't care what color you are. I don't care where you came from. You are my brother or sister, and we'll work together. Medical issues or disabilities is number 4. For obvious reasons, this is something that I think we all learned in kindergarten. We don't ever talk about, unless it's the topic of discussion where we're having an educated discussion on disabilities, or somebody offers up a medical condition and you want to have a conversation about it. But we don't bring that thing up in corporate America. And then finally, deeply personal, familial, or emotional or psychological issues. A team leader questions your ability to manage a project because in their perception, you couldn't manage your child who's addicted to drugs. Saying something like that would be frowned upon. You couldn't hold your relationship together. So what makes me think you can run a project here in the company? It's off limits. In the military, however, at least in the Marine Corps, that kind of thing it was never off limits. And you would hear some of the deepest, darkest insults in the barracks.
Yeah, you can't be our point guy. You can't even see when your girlfriend's cheating on you.
Right. Right. Well, and that's the thing, like half of it is half of it is half joking. I do recall I was on deployment, and there were two guys that grew up together, joined the military together, and they were deployed together. One was white, one was black, and they would make comments like that to each other, friendly comments. They were friends, lifelong friends, and they would make reference to each other's races or each other's background and stuff like that. And one time they got in trouble and seriously punished by the Marine Corps because A, I mean, I don't know if because you're friends it makes it any better or makes it acceptable. But B, it was basically a violation of the rules. So all of these things can be found on military.com. And again, that article is the 5 topics of conversation that veterans should avoid in the office, despite what you do in the rain room at Camp Pendleton after a 10-mile hike, or despite what you're doing in a gunfight. That kind of stuff is not acceptable out here while you're wearing a suit and a tie.
Yeah. Situational awareness, everybody. Situational awareness. When you get back around some of your buddies, go ahead, let the stuff fly.
Right.
But remember, the weekend's over. You got to get back to work on Monday. Don't be at the water cooler knife handing everybody and dropping F-bombs.
I saw a shirt the other day that said, like, I am the reason for safety briefs. So a safety brief was every Friday. It was, don't drink and drive, don't drive and drink. Any of the other things that apparently we're not supposed to say in corporate America, but it was basically don't go out and get in trouble. And then they have shirts now that say, I am the reason for safety briefs.
Actually, last Friday, I gave one of the other supervisors at work a military style safety briefing in jest. I said, hey, do you want to hear my favorite Friday Libo safety brief before you get out of here? And he said, yeah, absolutely. So I laid it on him, and then he laughed. And I said, by the way, don't listen to anything I just said. So, yeah. So, hey, Would you like to hear that before we get out of here, Matt?
Yeah.
Okay.
May as well.
Safety brief for the week, everybody that's listening. If you don't drink, drink. And if you drink lots. And if one of you sons of guns gets in a fight, all you sons of guns better get in a fight. That was my favorite one. We had a sergeant that would give it to us whenever Gunny wasn't around. Like, oh, Gunny told me to give the safety brief this weekend. So then he'd spit it out quick.
Right.
Dismissed.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I wouldn't do it here for the sake of it being public, but there were a few sayings that people would say during safety briefs that were talking about, finding somebody who might be underage and having relations with them, and breaking into people's houses and drinking and driving and fighting. And it was all that stuff, but it was highly offensive and not never to be recorded or replayed again.
Yeah. So, but anyways, anybody that's out there listening for the first time, we appreciate you. Thank you. Feel free to give us a like on Facebook or any of the other major social media networks. We're up on all of them. And we are also live on all the major podcast platforms. You can check us out there and subscribe to the show there. All our videos live in infamy over on YouTube. You can check out some of the old episodes over there, some of the old videos. But we appreciate every one of you guys and look forward to talking to you in 2 weeks, because Matt, early holiday season, the kid's going to be off school all week. You're going to spend some time with your son. So no show next week.
Going to take a break next Wednesday, but we'll be back. We'll be back soon after.
All right.
Going to rest the voice.
There you go. Yeah.
Rest the voice
and start working on some of those characters for the next big cartoon that's coming.
And then I'll share those with the group next time.
There you go. All right. So until next time, we'll be right back here